The wind came rolling off the Montana plains like a long, slow sigh, pushing snow in little spirals across the frozen earth and rattling the tin siding of the feed store in town. Eli Morgan stood on the warped wooden porch with his hands sunk deep into the pockets of his denim jacket, hat brim low to shield his eyes from the glare. 52 years old, his face carried the weather of decades under the sun and frost, lines carved by time, grief, and too many solitary winters. His wife had been gone nearly 8 years now. Cancer had taken her in the middle of spring when the lilacs were blooming, and the silence she left behind seemed to stretch wider than the ranch itself. He had no children, just cattle, a couple of barn cats, and the same routines he'd been repeating since he was old enough to walk fence lines. This morning was supposed to be like any other: sell a few feed sacks, pick up supplies, maybe stop for coffee at the diner before heading back out to the emptiness. But then he saw it. Tacked crookedly to the corkboard just inside the store was a piece of lined notebook paper, the edges curled from the dry air. The handwriting was shaky, almost hesitant, but the words were clear: $1 please, just make it quick. There was a phone number at the bottom and nothing else. It was the kind of thing you don't just walk past without feeling it stick to you somehow. Eli stared at it longer than he meant to, wondering what in the world it could mean. Some kind of joke, a scam, or worse, someone desperate for an end to something. The feed store owner, Carl, noticed him lingering. "Yeah," Carl said, lowering his voice, "that's Hannah's doing. Lives out past Miller Creek in that old cabin. She's been having a rough go." Carl didn't elaborate, but Eli could tell it wasn't the kind of rough a person bounces back from easily. Against his better judgment, and maybe because there wasn't much else in his life that felt urgent anymore, Eli scribbled down the number and decided he'd drive out there. The road to Miller Creek was a ribbon of ice and hard-packed snow, flanked by fields dotted with brittle grass poking through like the whiskers of some old animal. He found the cabin just as the light began to fade, its roof sagging under years of weather, smoke curling thinly from a metal chimney. When Hannah opened the door, she looked smaller than the voice on the phone had suggested, mid-40s maybe, cheeks hollow, eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd been waiting too long for things to get better. "You hear about the ad?" she asked, her tone somewhere between suspicion and surrender. Eli nodded, stepping inside. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and hay. In the corner, tied to a short lead, stood a bay mare, ribs showing, head low. "This is her," Hannah said softly. "Belle. My dad raised her. Best friend I ever had. But I can't feed her through the winter. And I can't watch her starve. So I figured someone might give her a quick, clean end for $1. Her voice cracked on the last word. Eli felt something twist in his chest. He'd come prepared to find some broken appliance or maybe a pile of junk she wanted hauled away. But this was different. The mare lifted her head just enough to meet his gaze, and in that quiet exchange he understood more than Hannah had said. "I'll take her," Eli said, reaching into his wallet for a single worn bill. Hannah's shoulders slumped, not in relief, exactly, but in the kind of release that comes when a decision is made. But when he added, "I'm not killing her," she looked up sharply, as if she hadn't heard right. "I've got room, and hay to spare," he continued. "She'll be warm, she'll be fed. You can come see her if you want." For a long moment Hannah just stared at him, her lips pressed together like she was holding back a flood. Then the tears came, fast and hot, cutting lines down her cold reddened cheeks. Nobody's done me a kindness in years," she whispered. Eli didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, took the lead rope, and led Belle out into the fading light. The snow had stopped, and the world felt suspended in a quiet that wasn't entirely lonely anymore. As he drove back toward the ranch, the mare riding steady in the trailer behind him, Eli found himself gripping the wheel with something almost like hope stirring in his chest. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was more than he'd felt in a long, long time. The first night Belle spent in Eli's barn, the wind howled so hard the rafters groaned, but inside it was warm, the air rich with the smell of hay and the faint sweetness of molasses from the feed bin. Eli stood for a while leaning on the stall door, watching her eat, slow, steady, as though every bite was something she wasn't sure she'd get again. He found himself speaking to her in the same low, quiet voice he used to use with his wife when she was tired or in pain, telling her she was safe now, that winter would pass. The days slipped into weeks, marked by simple things: filling the water trough, checking the fences, seeing Belle's coat grow a little shinier, her ribs begin to fade beneath new muscle. But it wasn't just the horse that changed. Eli started making trips into town more often, and each time, he'd swing by the lane out to Hannah's cabin. At first he just left small bundles on her porch, bread, canned soup, coffee, sometimes a bag of apples, without knocking. He figured she might be too proud to take them if he showed his face. But one morning, as he was walking back to his truck, her door opened. "You know I can see you from the window, right?" she called, pulling a shawl tighter around her thin frame. Her tone was wry, but there was a hint of something softer beneath it. That day she invited him in for coffee, and they sat at her kitchen table, the steam from the mugs curling between them like a fragile truce. Slowly, over those visits, Eli learned more. Hannah had been living alone for years since her father passed, working odd jobs when she could, but lately her health had taken a turn. She coughed often, a deep, rattling sound, and sometimes her hands shook when she reached for her cup. "Doc says I should get treatment," she admitted one afternoon, eyes fixed on the knot in the wooden tabletop, "but there's no way I can afford it. And truth be told, I don't much feel like being a burden." Eli didn't respond right away. The thought of her just giving up, of the world losing someone who still had a spark in her even after everything, sat wrong with him. That night, back at the ranch, he walked the length of the equipment shed, looking over the tools and machines he'd held onto for years. The hay baler, the extra tractor, things he'd told himself he needed, though truth was they mostly gathered dust now. Selling them felt unthinkable, they were pieces of his father's work, his own history. But by morning, he'd made up his mind. Within a week, the baler and tractor were gone, replaced by a thick envelope of cash that he left on Hannah's table with a note that said only, "It's not charity. It's an investment in the spring." When she found out what he'd done, she came to the ranch herself, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes wide. "Why?" she demanded, though her voice trembled. Eli shrugged, stroking Belle's neck. "Because I couldn't watch you starve out, same as her." Hannah laughed then, short, disbelieving, but real, and it was the first time he'd seen her smile without sadness in it. She agreed to start treatment, and over the next months, color slowly returned to her face. By the time the snow melted and the fields softened under the sun, she was working part-time at the diner, greeting customers with a voice stronger than he'd ever heard from her. That spring, Hannah suggested they put together a small fundraiser for folks in the community who'd had a rough winter. Eli helped fix up the old community hall, and word spread fast. Neighbors brought pies, quilts, jars of jam, and stories to share. Standing there that night, watching Hannah laugh with people she'd once kept at arm's length, Eli realized something. His life, once quiet and small, had opened up again, not in a loud or dramatic way, but like a frozen river slowly breaking free. Belle, now sleek and bright-eyed, galloped across the pasture as the sun dipped low, her mane catching the light like fire. Hannah stood beside him, arms folded, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You know," she said, "that $1, it might have been the best bargain in history." Eli chuckled, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his bones. "Sometimes," he said, $1's worth more than gold, when you spend it on hope." And in that moment, with the spring air carrying the scent of grass and the sound of the horses' hooves drumming the earth, it didn't matter that the world was still hard and winters would still come. What mattered was that they'd faced it together, and found something worth holding on to.